Today I'm making my focal point pop. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel twice a month, so if you enjoy my videos I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started with today's tag. I'm starting off with the background and I have cut one of the larger Terrific Tag dies from Crafty Necessities Starlight cardstock. I'm now going to add some ink blending around the outside edges. One way that I have found to make focal points pop away from the background is to have the background be really dark, and I thought that this would work really nicely for this tag today. So I'm starting off by going around the outside edges of this tag using Starlight ink. This is the same colour as the cardstock, so it's just going to go on slightly darker, but it's going to fade into that cardstock really nicely. So even if I don't get a great blend here, which I'm not, my sticky mat, isn't sticking to my craft mat as it usually would. So it's kind of moving around a little bit. The tag is stuck to the sticky mat really nicely, but the sticky mat is moving around a little bit, so I do apologize for that. So my ink blending didn't end up being quite as smooth as I usually would have it if I can manage it. But the great thing about these fresh dye inks is once they dry, they kind of smooth into the cardstock and they do blend out a lot nicer than when you initially put the ink on. I'm now going in with navy fresh dye ink, and I've switched to a mini blending brush here. When the brushes get smaller, the bristles of the brushes get smaller as well, and it automatically makes them more dense, and therefore you get a darker saturation of colour. So if you ever need your colour to be a lot darker, you want to go for a smaller brush, and if you want a really nice smooth kind of blend transition into another colour, you want to go for a larger blending brush. So I'm now going in with jet black ink, and I'm just going on the very outside edges of this tag. You can see that as I'm adding this ink in, the middle of the tag is becoming lighter because I've added darkness around the outside edge, and that's where your eye automatically goes to. Now this is going to get covered up by my focal point, but I am going to try and make my focal point lighter than the background, so your eye will automatically go to it and it will just tend to pop off of the background. I did want to add a little bit of interest to the background, but I didn't want anything that was going to detract from the focal point itself, so I thought that I would add some white splatter onto the background, but I thought that I wanted to have it like tiny little splatters, so again it doesn't detract from the focal point. So I've added a little bit of water onto a non-stick craft sheet and then added a bit of titanium white gouache. I'm now mixing them together to get the consistency that I want. I don't want it to be too loose because I'm going to end up with large splats of the paint. I'm using a very small brush here, a size 2 brush, and that's going to help with the size of the splatters as well. So I'm going to pick up some of that paint and tap my brush so that it kind of splats the paint onto the tag. I'm focusing most of the drops initially on the outside edges of the tag because that's where they're going to be seen the most. Like I said, my focal point is pretty much going to cover up the inside, but I don't know exactly where it's going to end up at this point, so I do still want some splatters in the inside, but I'm focusing them around the outside edges first, and then as the paint kind of goes from the brush, I'm just going to get small ones in the center. So I'm going to set that aside to dry while I work on my focal point. And I'm using the Mushroom Cottage layering die set today. I absolutely love this set. I love that these mushrooms are made to be little cottages, little houses, but I've decided that I'm just going to use the mushrooms on their own today. So I'm not making them into houses. I'm using some Crafty Necessities cardstock. So I've cut my pieces from Sand Dunes cardstock for the base of the mushrooms and the stems. And then for the tops of the mushrooms, I thought I would do something different today and cut those from Caribbean Sky cardstock. And then I've got the foliage cut from Limeade cardstock. And then the base of the tops of the mushrooms are cut from white cardstock. I want to add a little bit of ink blending onto these to add a little bit of interest to them. And I'm just going to go around the outside edges of these pieces. Again, that's just going to help make them pop. So your eye will automatically go to the center and they're going to kind of look a little bit more dimensional and not so flat. So I'm starting off with Sand Dunes ink. This is from the Coffee Break collection. And again, this is the same colour as the cardstock. I like going in with my lightest shade first, even if it's only just barely darker than the cardstock itself. I try where possible to kind of match my lightest colour with the cardstock. Like I say, it's just going to blend in really nicely. And so if it's not a perfectly smooth blend, you kind of just get like that transition colour between the lightest shade of the cardstock and then the darker colours on top. I'm now adding Glacier Caves fresh dye ink to the tops of these mushrooms. Again, starting off with the same colour that is the cardstock, which is Caribbean Sky, or Caribbean if you're not British. And I'm using the mini blending brush here, and I'm focusing most of the colour towards the bottom of these pieces. I want the top to have a nice highlight to them. I accidentally went in with way too much ink. This ink pad is really juicy, and ordinarily, probably at this point, I would recut this, but in the end, I quite liked how it turned out. They are quite dark, but I really love having that cardstock colour be really kind of pop away from the dark colours, sort of like how I'm doing with the background and the focal point. So I've got that really nice highlight at the top of the mushrooms. For the foliage, I wanted to cut one of these pieces in half just so that I've got a smaller piece. And then for the inks on this, I'm using the Green Valley Fresh Dye Ink collection. Now these are completely different colours than the colour of the cardstock, which is limeade. There are inks that do match. However, I just happen to absolutely love these green shades. They're my favourite and they just seem to go with any shade of cardstock that I tend to pick, which is really nice. I started off with the mini blending brush, and then for these darker shades I'm going in with the micro blending brush just to add that really nice dark saturation into the centre of these foliage pieces. And just trying to blend up so that the tips of the leaves are still the same colour as the original cardstock colour. To assemble these mushrooms, I'm adding some liquid glue onto the back of the stem. And then I can place that down onto the base there. And I'm using the liquid glue just so that I've got time to kind of wiggle it in place and line it up as best as possible. I can then go in with the white layer here, which is the kind of base of the top part. Again, trying to line that up as best as possible. I sort of place it down and then pick up the die cut with my fingers just to push that down and get that in place. And then I can add in the top part here. And I really love that once I add this piece on, you can see those kind of white dots. I think they look really nice, and there's really nice contrast against the darker blue of the top part of the mushroom there. I have done these mushrooms in lots of different colours in the past. I've done them teal and I've done them kind of like more of a traditional red, but I really love how these blue ones turned out. So I can just do the same thing here for this smaller mushroom, just adding a little bit of liquid glue onto the back, and then I can pop that in place. And I'm just using the tweezers here just to help me out with the placement. Really easy to line up. So now I've got my mushrooms all ready to go. I can assemble the tag. So I've cut another of the Terrific Tags die set from the same Starlight cardstock, and I'm adding some glue tape onto the back of that. I can then add the ink blended one on top, so they're back to back. This is not only going to give me some stability to the tag, but it's also going to make it all nice and neat on the back of the tag in case I want to write a personal message. Before I stick anything down onto the tag, I'm just going to bring in all of my elements here so that I can see where I want them to end up before I stick anything down. So I've got my 2 mushrooms here, and you can see that because they're quite a lot lighter than the background, well, when I say quite a lot lighter, they're a bit lighter, but the background is definitely darker. And because I've left that really nice highlight on the top of the mushrooms, they just tend to pop away from the background, which I really like. So just figuring out here where I want that foliage to go. And then once I'm happy with the placement, I can start sticking everything down. So for the foliage, I'm going to use some liquid glue. So just adding a little bit of that onto the leaves here. I'm not adding it towards the top of the leaves, just in case anything kind of overlaps the edge of the tag. I don't want you to be able to see glue on the back of them. And I really love having things overhanging tags. I just think it looks really nice, but you could definitely add this onto a card if you wanted to. I think this would work really nice, kind of like this look on a card as it is. I happen to really like tags. The main reason I think I like tags is just because it's a smaller size, like it's a smaller format, if that makes sense. But if I was to do this on a card, I would probably have my card be the whole blue cardstock with the ink blending around the outside edge, and then add the mushrooms in the center of the card, and maybe have like a sentiment towards the bottom to kind of ground them a little bit. I think that that would work nicely, but I do really love having this as a tag as well. So I've added some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of this first mushroom here. I can just remove the backings off of that. And then I haven't added the foam tape onto the left hand side because I knew that it was going to overlap that edge of the tag. And then for this smaller one here, I just want to add the foam tape on the right hand side because I don't want to, like, I want the mushrooms to be one level, if that makes sense. So I didn't want to add foam tape across the whole thing. Otherwise, I feel like it would maybe be a little bit too dimensional. But again, I don't want to add any foam tape on the very right hand side because I don't want you to be able to see that from the back of the tag. I may still add this onto a card, and I'd maybe like add it onto a white card base, and then the blue would automatically kind of be like a whole focal point in itself. Or maybe I could add it onto a blue card base and the mushrooms would still pop really nicely from the blue card base as well. I haven't decided yet. I may just keep it as a tag. So I'm now taking some twine. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I usually use black twine, but I thought that it would be a little bit harsh, and I thought that the natural twine here would work really nicely with the mushrooms. I feel like the tag has got quite like a natural feel to it, kind of like an outdoorsy feel, if that makes sense. So I thought that the natural twine would work really nicely. So I've just threaded that through the top of the tag, and now I can tie it in a bow. And it just takes me a little while to get the size of the bow as I want it to be. So I tend to sort of tighten it and then loosen it a little bit and then tighten it again. And then once I'm happy, I can cut those tails down with some scissors. I have then stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set, and I have stamped that down onto the same Starlight cardstock, which is the same cardstock as the tag. And I was just going to do it as this shade, but I felt like it was a little bit too light. So I'm just using the residual ink from the blending brushes, and I'm just going to go in with both of the blues that I used and just go on the kind of outside edges here so that the centre is still a little bit lighter than the outside edges. And then I'm just going to take a dry cloth and remove any excess ink from that embossing powder. And I feel that this is just going to blend in a little bit better. I want the mushrooms to be the focal point rather than the sentiment itself. So I did want it, although I don't want it to blend into the background, I did want it to be a little bit darker. So I've added some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of that, and now I can pop that down onto the tag. And I really feel that those mushrooms work really nicely, kind of popping away from that background. I decided not to add any embellishments, but I do think it would look really nice with maybe some like clear enamel dots or something. But I did decide, excuse me, to leave it plain today. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Hey there, Lydia here. I really do hope that you've just enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you can get your daily dose of crafty techniques and tutorials just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.